What we're doing at the D1 Grand Prix here is this is really an all-star show. This is where they take the best from Japan and also the best from the US and kind of stack them up against each other and see how we all sort ourselves out. The vehicle I'm driving is a 1969 Camaro. It's pretty much one of a kind right now. It's the only hot rod in drifting, or a classic American muscle car. Developing a car like this has proposed quite a bit of challenges because it's not all off-the-shelf parts. A lot of this we've had to develop on our own. Obviously, making an old American car that's used to going in a straight line all of a sudden have to drive sideways proposes some very interesting challenges. The biggest difference between the U.S. drivers and the Japanese drivers is obviously experience. Japanese drivers have been doing this a lot longer than we have, and usually their car development and how to make a drift car is probably a little bit better technology than we have right now. However, that gap is starting to close. How I got into the sport of drifting is actually I came from a racing background. I actually discovered drifting when I had a Japanese student. Since I'm an instructor at a racing school, I actually rode with a Japanese guy and actually learned about drifting that way. I would say my biggest competition today is really myself. Just trying to make it into the top 16, obviously for the finals, is an accomplishment for a driver or a guy that's drifting. What it's going to take for me to win today is obviously we have to get into the finals. With this qualifications, I have to do the best that I can. It's going to take a lot of speed out of my car to do so.
Hey, what's up, guys? Justin Napier. Decided that I'm going to interview all of the old school drivers that are coming to Summit Point Motorsports Park on October 26th and 27th. And he may or may not be here, but he is definitely the original Mr. Ryan Hampton. He drove a Camaro back in the early days before Formula Drift even existed, I think. But we're going to dive off into that. Ryan, tell us a little bit about yourself, man.
Okay, well, obviously, I'm fairly well known, I guess, for drifting the old Falcon 69 Camaro, kind of where my drifting career went sideways, more or less, but it was definitely an interesting trip because, prior to that, I was, professional road racing, doing IMSA, Endurance Series stuff. I went over to Europe, raced Formula cars, competed in the U.S. Formula 2000 series here. I did test driving for A.J. Foyt's IndyCar team and ended up as a Bondurant instructor. And oddly enough, that's actually how I fell into drifting, more or less. When we worked at Bondurant, this was probably, from 2000 to 2005, I was instructing there. And oddly enough, some of the challenges or ways that we could entertain ourselves was to more or less drive our entire road course with the car sideways while drifting. And at the time, we didn't even know this was an emerging sport at all. And I didn't find out about it until I had a student come over from Japan. And upon the completion of one of the exercises, I had my instructor car. So kind of on the way back to the classroom, I just kind of started screwing around and throwing the car sideways around the course. And he's like, drifting. He's like, you're a drifter. And I said, no, Takashi, I actually have a home. I'm not a drifter. And at that point, that's kind of was like, what do you mean drifting? What are you talking about? We just call this having fun. And he's like, no, this is a real sport. We're like, huh? What? Are you kidding? So he actually ended up sending me some of the option videos. And this was, like I said, probably back in 2001, 2002.
Wow.
And so I watched him. I'm like, oh my God, this is wild. This is pretty nuts. So some of the instructors and I formed this group that was doing some stuff that would have qualified for mischief videos. In fact, at one point we were going to be selling it. It was called Tijuana Slide Squad. And we would go out and maybe do some questionably legal things in the middle of the freeway, while wearing Mexican wrestling masks, while wearing lucha libre masks, things like doing 360s in the middle of traffic, but we won't talk about that.
What?
But, so then we actually got invited out to one of the Drift Day events, and we brought out some rental, literally we rented some of the old school older Mustangs, not the Fox body, but I don't even know what the next generation is. But we actually did a drifting event with rented Mustangs. You know, I would not encourage anybody to do this in this day and age. But back then you could get away with it. So we went out to one of the drift days out in California. We were in Arizona at the time. And I just kind of fell in love with the sport. And my parents were still living over, you know, in Southern California. In fact, not too far from Irwindale. I'm actually from a city that's very close to Irwindale called Glendora.
Okay.
So I actually started attending. A buddy of mine had a Z06 Corvette. And I said, hey, I'm going to go out and do one of the drift day competitions in your Z06. He's like, yeah, sure, go ahead. So I took his Z06 out to one of the first drift day competitions. I actually have the trophy from it still. I can't remember exactly the date off the top of my head, but it was sometime early in 2003.
Wow. So that was before D1 and stuff. That was before Formula Drift and D1 and stuff like this. Was just a bunch of guys. How did you even find the drifting event? Like, was it like forums or?
Yeah, I went to a couple of car shows, you know, kind of check out what the scene was, you know, out in Arizona. And I met up with a guy named Ryan Yap, and he had an S14 at the time. And he was much more knowledgeable about kind of the goings-ons of drifting at that time. And he's like, hey, come out to a drift day with me out in California. I said, okay. So we hopped in his S14 and went out, and, you know, that was the first actual like drift day I attended. And so I said, hey, this is pretty cool. And then the second time was the competition. And then I borrowed my buddy's, you know, Z06 Corvette to go enter it. And oddly enough, it was against who ended up in that competition was a gentleman named Calvin Wan. He ended up driving for Falcon, I think, in the FD RX-7 back in 2005, 2006 or something. But it's kind of a funny thing. I mean, obviously, you know, I hadn't been involved in the import car culture that much, and I show up with a, you know, Corvette Z06, and it was funny. I ended up finishing second in the competition, but we kept doing one more time until Calvin didn't spin out. So we kept going. I mean, it was a, you know, non-pro competition. It was fun, and I enjoyed it thoroughly. But it was just kind of, that was my first taste of the politics of drifting.
Wow.
And but I mean, I didn't have any problem with it. I'm like, hey, you know, I'm new to this scene. I show up with a Z06 and start playing around with it. So that was kind of my first foray into it. And then after that, I think D1 was doing their initial driver's search. And that was when they all came over here. It was a pretty big event in Irwindale, you know, because they didn't bring out all the D1 drivers. It was kind of just featuring kind of the U.S. drivers, and I convinced Bob Bondurant to let me bring one of the instructor cars out, which was a Crown, what they called the Cobra Vics, or the Crown Victorias that Roush had built. And I guess the Japanese guys loved it because it was this Crown Vic that was drifting like crazy. And so at that point, you know, it was kind of like, okay, well, yeah, you're good enough for D1 competition, so, you know, there you go. In fact, there's some Instagram videos of me running that Cobra Vic. It was a, you know, big black 4-door car. So I figured at that point we might as well go on and pursue the American side of it.
Yeah.
Except for a couple of events, I had a longtime friend of mine that worked over at Mazda, and they had built this factory Miata, so I drifted that a couple of times. And back then it was, you know, relatively easy to get rides. You know, if you were a halfway decent driver, you know, you were going to get rides. And then I actually hooked up with JIC, and then I did, I can't remember, it was Hyperfest. Hyperfest came out to California. They did a competition at California Speedway. I ended up winning that, and that was running, JIC had built this 350Z. So I kind of drove it in a one-off event there. And then they were going to build me an RX-8, but some things fell through.
Yeah.
You know, but as you know, in racing goes, sometimes things don't always pan out, even though they're really close to getting done. But actually, I had there was the Mazda team that I drove the endurance racing stuff with, like Daytona 24 Hours. They actually ended up building me a 3-rotor turbo that was going to go in the RX-8. Unfortunately, I don't think the guys tuning it knew how to tune a rotary and ended up blowing it up on the dyno, which was kind of frustrating.
This sounds like the same story a lot of rotary stories end up with, is that, they're easy to build, but the tuning part of it's the biggest pain.
So, to say the least, I mean, back then, it was a lot easier to get noticed as a driver. And, I was kind of doing the local drift events. I was offering some instruction. I did there's some videos out there. I can't remember, Drift Day put out a video, and I was describing heel toe downshifting. So, I mean, I was getting fairly well known, within kind of that drifting community as, being one of the first actual road racers that came over into drifting. And so, after that, Yokohama approached me. They're like, hey, we would like you to, kind of run these tires at, for D1 and that stuff. So I did a couple of drift events, under the banner of Yokohama. I think we tried, I built an FC RX-7, this was probably later in 2003 or something like that, had a Haltech on it, typical 2-rotor. Ran a couple of events with that, had some engine issues again with those damn rotaries. So after that, Falcon then approached me kind of as this JIC thing was kind of falling through, and I saw that wasn't going anywhere. Falcon came to me and said, hey, do you want to run Koguchi's old 180 SX? And I said, yeah, it's a solid car. I'll drive that. And so it started off the Formula D season. It was the 2005 season. So I started off with Falcon with their 180 SX. Well, consequently, at the time, I had a former Bondurant student of mine that I had kept in contact with over the few years, and his father was a wealthy individual, relatively wealthy, not crazy wealthy, but he was in contact with a guy that was building these hot rods. It was a company called Hot Rods to Hell, and he built his son this, I think it was a 72 or 73 Chevelle, and had this truck arm suspension on. So his company was basically doing truck arm suspensions for, hot rods. Okay. So he came to me, he's like, hey, if you could build the ultimate drift car, what would it be? And I said, well, that would be a 69 Camaro. Really? Built to the teeth for drifting. Yes. I said, that's what I would build. I said, at that point I had known, V8 power was going to be what was the dominant force in really drifting, if you look at it. Yeah. I mean, even back then, you had Reese Millen, you had Sam Hubinet in the V10. Unfortunately, at that point, it became, no replacement for displacement. Yeah, yeah. Turbos were great. I was driving a turbo car, but you had to keep those things spooled up so much that V8s were the ultimate answer as far as, instantaneous torque. You step on the throttle and it goes whop. Yeah. There's no waiting for turbo wind. It's immediate. So at that point, I said, hey, let's do something stupid like build a 69 Camaro. And Falcon was kind of opposed to it. They didn't really want to do it, but I'm like, hey, there's an entire untapped market that if you can get, some of these American companies, you can get, there's so many hot rod companies out there. You get them involved and those guys have real money, Yeah. If you can get some guys interested in it from that, they would be willing to spend a lot more money than, but they kind of went along with it. They said, okay, yeah, we'll humor you. So I actually had this gentleman named Brendan Shannon build a 69 Camaro. Well, there's a caveat to that, of course. I didn't have much control over the initial build of the car. If I did, I would have done a lot of things different. Mainly the truck arm suspension. Now, was an interesting thing with that truck arm suspension because when it was in drift, it had a shit ton of grip. I mean, it had a tremendous amount of grip, but the problem was getting the car initially sideways was a pain in the ass. I mean, you had to throw it, and half the time it was, it was a throw and pray maneuver. Like, can I catch it if I, throw it this hard into this thing?
Yeah. Did you guys have hydro brakes back then?
Yeah, we did. I had a big giant hydraulic brake in the back. I had dual caliper set up. That was one thing that we put was, 2 sets of Willwood calipers on the back. We had a subframe actually built for the car for the front. That came in later. At first he was like, the original bill was like, oh no, you don't need to do that. And I'm like, you kind of do. Because I had a little bit better idea of suspension geometry and how things had to work. Because we took the car out. There's actually some videos on the internet somewhere on YouTube of the car before it was painted in the Falcon livery when we were testing it out. And the thing was diabolical to drive. It was a freaking handful. I mean, he didn't have enough steering angle on it. It was kind of like, oh, let's hope. And springs were way too soft in the back, so the thing was hopping. He didn't have enough damper control. I think we had some QA1s on the back that were just some, pretty simple aftermarket stuff that was, I don't know, bought from one of the racing companies, whether it's, what's the name of that outfit out of Atlanta? The big one that's the big retailer for all the racing parts.
Oh gosh, I can't remember now. Yes, man.
I probably got Alzheimer's.
Yeah,
I probably got Alzheimer's in my old 52-year-old age.
Well, you definitely living like a legend I mean, still are, absolutely. I mean, and definitely didn't, stalk your Facebook profile indefinitely, but so that pretty well covers, the drifting to where we see it on the YouTube, Falcon, all this, everybody getting together and been like, let's build a really great car. And you're the crazy one who said, I want to do an old school drift car. Which, I mean, so what was like the other drivers' like opinion of that? That like you show up in this car, everybody else is in their 240 SXs or 180s. I don't even know what was it like back then. Honestly, I don't know what the common car was.
They hated it.
Yeah, so it was just like you were just like the black sheep, like get out of here,
Yeah, they didn't hate it because it was competitive. They just hated it because they thought it was dumb.
Yeah, I feel like most of the old school guys which the car community is way more open ended now, and especially with modern day media companies making anything look cool. I mean, you kind of laid the foundation for the rest of us, really, because it's like, well, somebody's already done it. You know what I mean? And I just wondered what would, if you had like modern day technology and angle arms and angle kits and stuff like that back then, how competitive do you think you could have got that car?
Yeah, well, that was an interesting thing because we ended up going with it was an off the shelf subframe in the front that allowed us to build snout bars, and then we were sponsored by Tane at the time, once Falcon kind of took over the car, and they actually made custom dampers for that vehicle that were a little bit longer travel. We ended up, we didn't make crazy A arms at that time, but we definitely did an angle kit for the steering arms, got a little bit more. If I kept going with that car, I would have eliminated the truck arm suspension and gone to like one of the 4-link kits.
Yeah,
I think that would have gone, because we still had a pan hard rod with truck arms, so wasn't the best for the application for sure. I think that car could have been built competitive. The initial engine that they had in that car was a 468 big block, all cast iron. Thing was heavy as shit. It was an absolute beast. It was like 13-to-1 compression, 468, and it was still carbureted as well. So,
Wow.
the thing was an absolute beast. Well, later on, we went and bought a used 410 sprint car motor for the car, which was, all aluminum block, significantly lighter at the front end, and that helped the car out a lot. In fact, probably one of the last few videos you'll see of that car when it had the Falcon. It had Falcon livery, but it was black and blue. And I think there was a video from Vegas in it, and that's when we put the sprint car motor in, and the car started to become much more drivable. At that point, I was kind of getting some undue pressure. Well, you can't really run this old hot rod anymore. You gotta get into something more modern. We ended up going with the C5 Z06 and building that into a drift car. Unfortunately, Falcon lost a lot of their budget, and I was one of the seconds or thirds to get cut. So at that point, we were stuck with a C5 Z06, and then a giant legal battle actually started with that Camaro. And in fact, it's rusting away somewhere in Southern California right now. I have no idea where the car even is.
That is wild. To just the end of the car is just for it to sit somewhere until it's gone.
It's just basically there was the guy who was kind of doing the prep work on it. I mean, I wasn't living in California at the time, but the guy who owned the car, there was a guy that I knew that was taking care of the car, and all of a sudden he presented the car owner with a random rent bill for like $4,000. And the guy's like, that was never in an agreement where I was paying you storage of the car. You know, we're kind of helping you out, you know, getting your name out there with the hot rod crowd. And this was never agreed upon. So the guy tried to put a mechanic's lien on it. And then, unfortunately, the guy who built the car was an attorney. So he basically locked it up to where the guy can't do anything with it. He can't sell it. He can't do anything with it. He's just got to sit there with this Camaro in his shop lot somewhere. So it's literally just rotting away. It's kind of a sad story. Camaro deal was, though. There's a guy named Nick Fosikis who still works over there at Falcon, and I'm actually still contact him from time to time, and we chat here and there. You know, obviously still being involved in the tire industry. So on occasion we chat about some things, and he's actually, you know, continued to help me out over the years. You know, even after I wasn't really a Falcon driver and I did some road racing stuff, he actually, you know, still helped me out with tires and that, even after all that. But one of the funniest things about that Camaro, that old Falcon Camaro is by far probably one of their most famous drift cars. You know, to this day, the first model that they made of a drift car from Falcon, and it was one of the smaller companies, they actually had the 69 Camaro made before anything else. That was before, you know, JR's Mustang or the FD or anything like that. And oddly enough, the one that they ended up making into a Hot Wheels first was the Camaro.
I actually think I saw a picture on your profile of it, and the diecast of it.
Yeah. There is an actual Hot Wheels of the 69 Camaro. I think since then they've made the FD and they made a couple other cars, but he contacted me and he's like, hey, would you be opposed to making a Hot Wheels 69 Camaro Falcon car? I said, no, absolutely not, man. Go ahead. So, yeah, there's people that to this day, a couple of people at work had, you know, people walk up to me and still have me sign their Hot Wheels cars. That is humorous so cool. For me. I'm nobody, man. I'm just some idiot that tried to make a 69 work.
Well, and I mean, you have quite a few other accomplishments. I mean, not just, you know, in drifting. I mean, I saw that you in the Rolex 24, you had a win with the team, and then you had some IndyCar experience as well.
Yeah, I mean, I've finished second, third, and fifth at the Daytona 24 Hours. I haven't quite won it yet. At one point we were on track to win it, but unfortunately the team owner didn't listen when they said, "Hey, there's a bunch of rain coming down on the front straightaway, and you only got one lap to go. Why don't you go ahead and pull into the pits this lap?" And he said, "No, I got it." No, he didn't get it.
He didn't get it. Oh my goodness.
He didn't get it and wadded the car up, and that was actually the race we finished second in. And it rained the entire probably last 6 hours of the race. And even though we were out for about an hour and a half, if it had dried out, we would have caught the first place car, because the first place car at that point only had fifth gear. So we would have been able to run them down in the dry.
Wow. Racing back then.
No, I said "c'est la vie" is the French saying. Just
Oh,
how
okay.
life goes.
Yeah, racing back then must have been absolutely just crazy. I mean, you guys definitely. Yeah, I mean, I'm sure the technology was fine, but like it's a lot better now, of course. But I mean, like
Yeah.
data logging and the chemical compounds of tires and stuff like that. I mean, we have a lot more knowledge on just on the the smaller guy level. Not even sitting there running the Rolex 24. Like, what kind of how did you guys figure out what worked?
I mean, at that point we were, data acquisition was starting to come into play. They were still relying a lot on driver feedback, though. Honestly, it was, hey, the car's pushing too much. We've got too much understeer mid corner. What can we do to free the car up at the back? And I mean, there were several things you could start to chase down. Stiffen the springs in the rear end, stiffen the bar at the rear end. Back then is when kind of the big, I guess, shock revolution started happening, and they actually, really started employing some engineers. And even later on in my Formula Car career, we started working with some actual shock engineers, and it was pretty amazing what can be done with shocks on a car. I mean, absolutely incredible. And in fact, one of the guys that I was last involved with, in the later part of my drifting career, a gentleman named Chris Marion, he went on to work with Dye's team. He actually ended up working for KW Suspensions, and the stuff that they were doing, even with drift cars and shocks, was absolutely incredible. I mean, you could pull a second to a second and a half out of a lap time with just working with how the shocks were, how you were interacting with the shock, because ultimately the shock is what, if you look at it, that really almost translates what the driver is feeling. If the driver is capable of feeling more, you're probably going to be better off when you feel that understeer come in. You'll more directly define, okay, is understeer coming in because of something I'm doing as a driver, or is it just a natural behavior of the vehicle? So, yeah, it was definitely an interesting time. I mean, now with data and onboard telemetry, I mean, you look at F1 now, and I mean, I really wonder how much driver input there actually is at that point.
Well, they're definitely still athletes. I mean, definitely.
Undoubtedly.
Yeah, definitely still athletes. I would say I feel that way more about NASCAR now, because you see it time and time again where an upcoming star comes through and he's rocking the Joe Gibbs stuff in the truck series, and then or whatever the top truck is in that series, and he goes in there and just dominates with no issue. It's like, well, how much is that the driver and how much is it the car?
How much is that as the car?
Yeah.
I mean, at the time I was driving, there's still a lot of vehicle involved in it. I mean, it's back when I was doing the Indy Lights stuff, I was blessed to actually work with one of the engineers that was a rival engineer of mine, rather famous guy in IndyCar circles named Dave Connie, and he was the guy who got Michael Andretti his start. He did numerous things, and he said, hey, I want to work with Ryan, because I want to work with this guy, because he's actually one of the last few drivers that you can get feedback from, and I can correlate that with data on the car. And I mean, in the Indy Lights, the few Indy Lights races we did, we ended up winning one. We finished third. And the one track that was difficult to drive, we absolutely killed everyone. It was, in fact, to this day, there's the IndyCar series record for the guy who has the largest margins for pole position is me. At 3/4 of a second, I had over the entire field. And then in that race, at that time, I was the only guy ever to lead the race from start to finish. I never got past. But I mean, I'm not some tremendous driver or anything like that. I would hate to sound arrogant with it, but unfortunately, a lot of the drivers taken out of it now, and a lot of the engineering decisions are based on engineer, and it's kind of like, okay, this monkey, as Tom Cruise said in Tropic Thunder, a nutless monkey could do your job.
Yeah. Well, also, I mean, this new generation
that's not true. There's a lot of very talented drivers out there.
Yeah, well, this new generation also I've noticed is different. I'm kind of like on the top end of that, where these kids now, these guys now, normally have, they're very blessed with parents that want to invest in them, and so I mean they're starting core midgets at age whatever they could push the pedal, and then as soon as that, they're moving right up. And then when they're not at the racetrack, they're also on sim racing, because sim racing is so real now. And so, I mean, that's all these kids do nowadays, is just drive 20, when they're awake, they're driving, and, the only time they're not driving is when they're asleep.
Yeah, no, I mean, the simulator technology is absolutely insane. I mean, these next group of racers, I don't think I could compete with these kids anymore, man. They are, like I said, I mean, I got my start in go-karts when I was 15 years old, or I started in 14 years old, I started kart racing. So, I mean, I wasn't doing it seriously until I was like 16 or 17 at the time. So, but there were kids like Buddy Rice, Aaron Justice, these kids who went on to win Indy 500s. I mean, they were racing at 7 and 8 years old in 4-cycle stuff and karts, and like you said, and now you have to compete with simulators, which, oddly enough, in my current job, in fact, where I work now, which is Goodyear Tire, we have two $10 million simulators that we're doing modeling on tires with vehicle models that are getting extremely sophisticated. I mean, we're starting to see, aside from doing like at limit driving, we're starting to be able to see differences in like highway driving, in comparison to real world tires versus, okay, here's a simulated tire. We've tested this out in the physical world. We've made a tire model. We've got a vehicle model from GM or Ford that we know that works. Can you feel these differences, at highway driving, which is, 2-3 degrees of steering input.
Yeah.
So it's rather interesting to actually see that the simulator technology and the modeling has come far enough to be able to differentiate tires, at the point of 2 to 3 degrees steering. I mean, that's absolutely incredible how precise that is. And now with, like I said, sim racing, I mean, a lot of the drivers that I work with here at Goodyear now, they're pretty into the sim racing stuff. And I mean, it is pretty incredible about how much like racecraft and even vehicle setup you can get out of that. It's an absolutely imperative training tool if you're going to be, a professional driver today.
Oh yeah, I think in today's Formula Drift, we're looking at Formula Drift in 2024. I think every single driver out there is active on the sim. I think every single one of them. If they're going to a track, if they're going to Utah next week, they're going to practice Utah relentlessly. In fact, Manoia, basically, he was in Japan, became a FD pro in Japan, and came over here. And, all they talk about is how much he sim races, and that's how he's just on that level. It's just because he's just, all he does is sim race. And I'm just like that. And I mean, I've even found myself, I got recently on the sim about a year ago, huge improvement, because you're able to like just witness new stuff, and then you're able to just try things. And if you wreck the car, you're just like, oh, well, hit the button and not pay for tires and all that, but nothing really it's not a total 100% substitute for real life, especially in, our cases where we're driving, in your case, we're driving a 69 Camaro, and I have a 74 Monte Carlo. So, you can't really simulate that particular car, but you can sure get damn close.
You can get close enough. I mean, a lot of the, like you said, gross motor movements are going to be very, very similar. I mean, the big thing is, as long as you know steering ratio on your car, if you can program that into the sim, okay, I'm going to have to turn the wheel X amount to get to full lock. And if you can program that into the simulator, the big thing is setting up the environment. That is the key, trying to get as close as you can to your vehicle setup. I mean, if you can do that, dude, that is, like you said, you hit the wall, you're like, oh, hit the reset button.
Yeah.
I'm good to go. I mean, kind of going on from where kind of my drifting career went after quote unquote, the drifting. I mean, in all honesty, it's a tough sport to be in. It's a lot like trying to be an actor or an actress at this point. I mean, in 2007, I was racing with a company called McKinney Motorsports, and they kind of ran out of money, and we were trying to find sponsors at it. And let me tell you, it is a challenging thing to do. I mean, that is probably the most difficult part of racing. You can have all the talent in the world. I mean, I know drivers that were way more talented than I was that couldn't find the money to continue on. So that is definitely a more challenging part of the sport, I think, today, because I mean, back when I started out drifting, everybody was throwing money at it too.
That's crazy.
You had Apex I, HKS. Everybody was trying to kind of expand their U.S. market even more. I mean, you could go to a company and you get 2 or 3 body kits for the year. Like, just be like, hey, I'm running Formula D. I would like to run your body kit. I'll give you a sticker, and they'd be like, oh yeah, here's 3 body kits for you. Probably doing it today is probably like pulling teeth. The biggest first step is getting somebody to, obviously commit to you. And I mean, you almost have to be a marketing expert at that point. You're like, hey, but this isn't, I'm not just taking money from you. I'm going to give you a return on your investment. I mean, that's what everybody's looking for. How are you going to promote my product? And you've got to almost come at it from their perspective to start with. Like, okay, how can I help this guy, sell more, carburetor parts? Well, okay, we're going to set up a booth at this event. We're going to do this. We're, going to hire some bougie models. We're going to do that. That's what we're going to do at this level. So, I mean, it's almost like you have to put together an entire marketing plan. You almost have to have a marketing guy that's like, here's how we're going to make you money. It's not, hey, I'm going to put your sticker on the side of the car and I'm going to, it's going to look great.
Yeah, then after that, you have to, post on Instagram, social medias before, during, after, and as a driver, you're right. I mean, you almost have to have a guy. You have to pretty much hire a guy and come to the event. This is all you do, because you can't, as a driver, you just can't. You gotta talk to fans. You've got to, run the car. You got to drive the car, and you just don't have time for all that. But that's a horrible excuse. You know what I mean? Like, you can't go to a company and be like, oh man, I didn't get an Instagram post in today because, I was busy driving the car. No, you can't.
I mean, heck, I was one of the guys that designed the first, Drift Alliance MySpace page for crying out loud.
Oh my gosh!
I couldn't imagine how social media is now influenced by that, but obviously it's a huge part. I mean, you look at like Chris Forsberg. For the longest time, he wasn't really active on Facebook, but I mean, you look at this season, and he's all of a sudden become very active.
Yeah, basically, roughly a post.
Wonder if Nos finally said, "Hey, you need to start posting some stuff, bro."
Yeah, I mean, they probably got him down where he's probably posting daily.
Yeah.
And they have have you ever been to PRI in Indianapolis?
No, I've been to SEMA several times. I never got out to the PRI show.
Well, PRI, they do quite a few seminars on marketing and how to get sponsors and algorithms and stuff like that. And they've pretty well figured out now that it doesn't even matter how many followers you have anymore, because they know you can just buy followers. Now what they want to see is your analytics of how many accounts did you reach and what was the peak and when was it and who is it and stuff like that.
They're looking for organic clicks, not generated.
Right. So, I mean, it's just going to keep getting tougher and tougher. So, I mean, I would say in probably 10 years time, you probably won't see any regular people up in Formula Drift or NASCAR or anything. Oh, NASCAR is already like that. There's no regular dudes in any of NASCAR anymore. You might find one or two in the truck series who got really lucky, but past that, probably won't. I would say maybe like a Josh Berry. I'd say he might be one exception. I don't know if he comes from a lot of money or not, but he definitely kind of gives off a regular dude vibe. who just had a lot of talent. I didn't really dive deep in his profile, but that's the vibe I get from him. And it's going to be definitely interesting. So kind of backtracking a little bit. So we started off in D1. So that was like the first. Was that like Formula Drift before it was Formula Drift, or was D1 something different and Formula Drift was something different?
D1 was starting to come in. FD had announced that they were going to start their series, and obviously at that point I was an instructor for Drift Day and things like that, so I kind of knew it was coming down the pipe when they started Formula D. But obviously D1 was coming over here to Irwindale, and Falcon was heavily involved in that.
Mm-hmm.
So by default, oh shoot, I guess my gate isn't done yet. Sorry, I just got home. But at that point, D1 was still kind of the premier series worldwide. I haven't kept up too much with what D1's done in the last several years. I know, Formula D has been majorly successful and kind of even spreading into the Japan market compared to D1. But at the time, FD was very much in its infancy. I mean, I was there when Jim Lau and Ryan Sage were doing a lot of the planning meetings. They would talk to us drivers a lot, like, hey, what do we need to do as a judging format? Things of that nature. But D1, oddly enough, those Japanese guys absolutely loved the Camaro. It wasn't the most competitive car, but they absolutely loved that. We got invited to the World Finals, whether it was hell or high water. When we ran that car for the first time, it broke every decibel level reading that was known to man. I mean, it had straight pipes out the side with a 468 big block high compression. And they were nailing down everybody on noise. They did not say one word about the Camaro. And I know damn well that thing was above 140 decibels at the grandstands.
Yeah, well, I mean, when it gets the crowd going like that, I mean, I've definitely, even in today's drift scene, I've talked to enough of the other old school guys that there's a little bit of bias towards us. It's either going to be good bias or it's going to be bad bias, and there's really no middle ground. There's a few events where I've been there and they already knew me, and so I just became another dude. But when you first show up in a car like that, it's like, what is going on here?
Yeah, you're gonna have a little bit of bias. That's definitely something that I faced more in Formula D than I did in D1 because the Atlanta event, the first or second event that we showed up with that car, they set out some very specific rules. Like if you drop a tire, it's automatically 10 points off. If you don't hit the clipping point, it's another 20 off. And at that point, I did everything right. Every entry right. I didn't drop a tire. I hit every clipping point. And I think we ended up 17th out of top 16. They let another car in that was dropping tires all over the place, mowed over the clipping point cone, and I'm like, what the hell is this? I mean, I was pissed off. I went to the judges and I'm like, what is this bullshit? And they're like, it's just how it is.
Yeah, so definitely still like that today, honestly. I think no matter what it is in any drift competition, there is going to be either some bias or a little bit of crap, and it's just, and the cruddy thing is all in the eye of the beholder, because for you're like, what the crap is this? And the other guy's like, ooh, I barely made it,
Yeah, and you're like, yeah, there was a couple of guys, in fact, the team owner had filmed every single run. And I went back to the judges. I'm like, there's no way this is a 87-point run. You said you're minus 10. The guy dropped tires twice. That's an automatic 20 off, and hit the clipping point. Okay, that's 40 off. So now we're at a 60. How did I not score this when here is my run? Every single clipping point, car was sideways, had good angle. It was like tons of smoke. What do you want? But at that point in that infancy, you were kind of the bastard child of running, especially an old school American car.
Mm-hmm.
So that's kind of what you face.
I definitely think you, in today's age, I think with enough popularity, I think you could pull it off. You could pull it off again. I've looked over the book multiple times, at least to go into Pro Spec, which, nowadays is like the Xfinity car.
It's fucking crazy.
And
these things have, it's like, what the hell is that?
Yeah, it goes pro. It goes. So I guess back then it was just basically you're either pro or not pro.
Yeah.
So
you either run in the series or you don't.
Yeah. So nowadays you have to go to Pro-Am, which is pretty open. As long as your car passes tech, anybody can go to that. And then you get your FD Pro Spec license from that, and then you got to basically be picked to go to pro. So normally it's like top 5 guys in points. If they're all real close in points, they'll give like the top 3 their pro license. I think last year it was like damn near a tie for top 5. So like 5 guys got their pro license and stuff like that. You don't necessarily have to win. I mean, if you win, you're guaranteed, but you don't necessarily have to win. You just have to basically do everything you can to win.
Gotcha.
And then you end up in pro, and then, these cars nowadays, man, I'm sure you've seen a little bit of Formula Drift now, but it's ridiculous.
They're absolutely nuts. You talk about things with like 800 horsepower, 9,000 horsepower, and basically, I don't know if they have weight limits on them even now, but you look at some of these cars, if they were to actually like go around Road Atlanta, they'd probably beat like the top GT time in terms of actual lap times. Oh yeah, they're stupidly gripped up. They're so gripped up, like if they're even off throttle for a second, the car just wants to shoot off a direction, and so they do have weight limits from my understanding. So they have a weight to tire limit. So basically if you're X weight, you can have X tire. If you're X weight, you can have this tire. And so basically everybody tries to be like on the crisp of the next big tire. You know what I mean? Just heavy enough to be on the next bigger tire, but not like on the heavy end of that spectrum, That's how they've maintained the field pretty good. And I think it's actually working out pretty good for them. It's been really competitive. At that point, it would just become ridiculous because you have guys building 2,200 pound cars with 800 horsepower and have a 315 tire on the back or 345 tire on the back.
Yeah.
At that point it just becomes ridiculous. So at least they've policed that and got it, somewhat under control.
Yeah. And Pro Spec, everybody runs a 255 GT radial. So everybody's on the same tire there.
Okay.
So that makes the field very, very level as well,
So is that it's actually the spec tire you have to run?
Right, you have to run. It is the GT radial.
Anytime you go to a spec tire, man, that's not a losing proposition for a tire company.
Oh no, not at all, not at all. I'm sure they're selling them at a pretty good discount, but still, they're making money.
Trust me, the tire company's still making money on it.
Yeah.
That was the funny thing about like IndyCar racing. You're like, I have to run a Firehawk sticker, but wait a minute, why am I spending $1,500 on a set of tires? I shouldn't have to run a sticker if I do that.
Yeah, tires nowadays are definitely way better than I can imagine that you guys had back then. I'm sure back then you guys had a pretty good idea, but no way they were engineered like they are today.
No. But back when, almost at the time, back when I was with Falcon, they had just come out with the the RT 615 or whatever, 619, 615, I can't remember. But that was before the K, and that was almost their premier tire for drifting, and it worked extremely well, So yeah, I imagine now they're probably tuning tires specifically for drifting. I've heard stories here and there from my buddy who worked for KW about some of the going-ons of the backdoor tire deals, and what is stamped on the side of the tire as a 200 tread wear very well may not be.
There's been some tires where it said like 300 on them, and I'm like, there's no way this is 300. This is really grippy.
Yeah. I mean, bear in mind, working in the tire industry now for 14 years, that number means very, very little, honestly. I mean, a lot of people think, okay, it's a 200 tread wear tire. That means got a lot of grip. That's not necessarily always the case. But oddly enough, the Cooper race tire that we had, we actually did the UTQG testing on it. It came out to be a 600 tread wear tire.
Oh, okay.
But on the side, it still said 200. It was still a 200 tread wear tire because everybody believed that's what the magic grip number was. Even though that wasn't the case. And the funny thing about UTQG, you can stamp anything under the actual mileage, but you can't go over.
Huh.
So,
I guess that makes sense.
Yeah, you can stamp whatever you want, a 220, 200, if it tested at that distance for tread wear, then that you can't go over the maximum. You can always go under the minimum. So you could call a 600 tread wear tire a 180 if you wanted to.
Right, because it's not false advertising.
Yep, you're not false advertising. Exactly that.
Yeah. Wow. Well, Ryan, I have held you up for a good while here now. So a couple last questions here. So we've already talked about it a little bit. Our good friend Kylie Mackey offered up his car for quite a few laps at Summit Point Motorsports Park for the Frankner Fright event. Have you looked in to see if you're gonna be able to fly out?
I'm still looking into it. It just depends on when I get back from Pennsylvania with my daughter and her boarding school and her horses, which is an equally expensive sport to motorsports, as I've come to find out.
Goodness gracious. But if you do, definitely reach out to us and or reach out to Kylie or reach out to me, and we'll get the logistics on the West Virginia side at least worked out for you. Who picks you up from the airport, drops you off, and
maybe I'll just stop by on the way back from Pennsylvania. No, I would love to do it. I mean, obviously, in my current day-to-day job, I get to go play around with cars every single day. Being a tire test driver, guess what? You get to keep your skills still sharp. So, should have confidence that I'm not going to wad the car up and be this guy hadn't drifted in freaking 12 years. Nope, still do it every day.
He was such a cool dude. I don't think it mattered to him. I think he just wanted to see you drive again.
See if I still got it, huh?
Yeah, I actually have to do an interview with him next, so we're definitely gonna have to talk some trash about you, I guess.
You're more than welcome to. I deserve it, trust me.
Well, Ryan, thank you so much for your time, and I hope I see you out at Summit Point Motorsports Park. It's gonna be an awesome one. We're having about 8 so far. I got 7 confirmed, but I think I'm gonna end up with about 8 or 10 old school drift cars running together there. It is a regular event, so hopefully a lot of the 350Zs and the Corvettes also come out and slide with us.
Awesome. You should probably reach out to like Tony Angelo and those guys who I was with Drift Alliance with.
Mm-hmm.
He's probably a bit closer to you than I actually am, and I think he would be a great guy to reach out to and see if you can get a hold of.
Okay.
In fact, maybe I'll reach out to him and be like, "Hey, this guy's going to contact you." Who knows?
Hey, definitely set it up. If anything, I can get some cool racing stories out of him interviewing him.
Yeah. He's a good dude. I haven't talked to him in a couple of years, but I know Tony's not too far away from you there. I think Chris Forsberg's out in Southern California. JR's still back there in Maryland, as far as I know so far, from the last time I've talked to him.
Yeah, I'm trying to get out to Ryan Turk. He's got a old Toyota truck that he drifts now, and
oh yeah, he's fucking nuts.
Yeah, those guys are incredibly hard to get a hold of. So
yeah, I mean, I don't know if I could. I don't know how much power or reach I have with those guys, but I'll reach out to them.
That would be pretty cool, man.